sort of forcefully attacking me verbally. Derek, and we were pushing back, and we were asking one simple question as a general matter: where is the evidence? So,
what response did you get when you asked Ms. Powell and her colleagues? Where's the
a variety of responses based on my current recollection, including, can't believe you would say something like, things like this, like, what do you mean, where's the evidence? You should know, and things like that, or, a disregard, I would say, a general disregard for the importance of actually backing up what you say with facts.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York now. Where's the beef? That's all he wanted to know. Described by January 6th committee member Jamie Raskin as, quote, the craziest meeting of the Trump presidency, where you just heard from then White House counsel Pat Cipollone talk about a, quote, disregard for backing up what they said with facts. It was a wild meeting held in the Oval Office on December 18th, 2020. I remember that date because what ensued that night was an hours-long duel between Trump's own insiders. His allies on one side included Sidney Powell and Mike Flynn, and several White House lawyers on the other. They clashed over outlandish claims of voter fraud and ideas about what Donald Trump should do in order to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The meeting at times, as you just heard there, became very heated. People shouting and hurling insults at each other, according to people who were in the room. Now, among the many out there election conspiracies discussed that night in that meeting was this: the idea that Trump could issue an executive order to direct the federal government to seize highly sensitive voting machines and data. So thoughts that Cipollone stated would be a, quote, terrible idea.
Why was this, on a broader scale, a bad idea for the country?
To have the federal government seize voting machines, it's a terrible idea for the country. That's not how we do things in the United States. There's no legal authority to do that. And there is a way to contest elections, that happens all the time. But the idea that the federal government could come in and seize election machines, that's I don't understand why I would even have to tell you why that's a bad idea for the country.
Looking back at why we're looking back on this insane meeting and the insane things that were discussed. So insane that Pat Cipollone doesn't know why he has to tell the January 6th Select Committee why it was such a terrible idea. Well, why? Other than just sheer disbelief that it ever happened in the first place, is because it is now being recognized as a potential new front of criminal exposure for the twice impeached, now indicted ex-president himself. According to a brand new letter to DOJ and the FBI from a legal advocacy group called Free Speech for People, since Trump was presiding over that meeting and heard about this plan, this idea to seize the machines, he was, quote, at a minimum aware of the unlawful multi-state plot, end quote. The letter cites the transcript of Derek Lyons' testimony to the 1-6 Select Committee. Lyons served as White House staff secretary, and he spoke about how Rudy Giuliani specifically mentioned getting access to voting machines in Georgia in order to find evidence of fraud. The letter from Free Speech for People continues, quote, less media and public attention have been focused on the fact that the testimony also includes references to a parallel plan for non-governmental individuals and entities to access voting systems. The stated goal of this effort to gain access to software and electronic data was to help construct narratives that would support overturning the election. The plan did proceed, and after a few failed attempts, was executed to successfully obtain copies of voting system software in Michigan and in Georgia. All of this boils down to what the New York Times describes this way in reporting over the weekend, quote, allies of Trump ultimately succeeded in copying the election software in those two states. And the breach of voting data in Georgia is being examined by prosecutors as part of a broader criminal investigation into whether Trump and his allies interfered in the presidential election there. The ex-president's participation in the discussion of the Georgia plan could increase his risk of possible legal exposure there. All of it can be viewed in a whole new light following the breaking news we just shared with you minutes ago. Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis is prepping law enforcement to prepare for indictments this summer. This is where we begin the hour. Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California, a former member of the House Select Committee on January 6th, and Mark Harris is here. He was senior investigative counsel for the January 6th Select Committee. He had the mission specifically of doing some of this investigation into the voting machines. Mark, let me start with you. I saw this story pop up. I read it 3 times. Is this making sure that this crush of work that came out in the final report and the transcripts isn't missed by DOJ? Tell me what this effort is about, as far as you understand it from this advocacy group.
Well, I'm not sure what their motivation was in sending the letter. I do know that it draws heavily on some of the material that's come out in the litigation in Georgia in the Curling versus Raffensperger case that's referenced in the letter. And I know that's material that those folks in that litigation want to see brought to light. And perhaps they've read the report and they can see some of the material that maybe we didn't highlight in the hearings or in the report per se, but they've read the transcripts, and there is a fair amount of material in there that for various space reasons and otherwise wasn't necessarily highlighted, and they seem to think that they want to call attention to it, apparently.
I mean, to be honest, I have heard from a lot of people who've pointed me toward things that were in the transcripts that maybe didn't get a lot of attention. And for in defense of the committee, it was literally being shut down, pushing out information as Kevin McCarthy was getting ready for his what turned out to be ludicrous run for the speakership. But what is it about the 4 referrals and the fact that there isn't really public evidence that anything is imminent from Jack Smith that you think makes groups jumpy and makes them feel like they have to take this step of saying, hey, look here?
Well, this has been going on for over a year now of people who feel that based on what they've seen, that charges should be brought, and they're not happy with the pace at which things are developing. And so oftentimes we see reports or people speaking out publicly saying, well, nothing's happening. Jack Smith isn't doing anything, or what's Fani Willis up to? And then something will come out, a report that people were before the grand jury or there's litigation that reveals that these folks are busy and they are doing their jobs. I was a federal prosecutor for many years, and I know that sometimes things don't work at the pace that certain victims or the public wants to see, but it's moving. And I think the story you just broke at the beginning of this segment suggests that, as Senator McCaskill said, maybe it's slower than she would like, but things are happening, and she seems like, Ms. Willis seems like she has a timetable in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think the anxiety comes from 2 things. You know, the reality that the behavior is ongoing on Trump's part, and the reality that we are a country at greater risk because domestic violent extremism has intersected with lies about the 2020 election. It's not the fault of either of you 2. You've worked to make sure that the truth gets out and gets out quickly. Congresswoman, I want to ask you, just in the plainest way you can explain it, what was Trump's role in the plan to seize voting machines?
Well, as usual, as any good mob boss would, he had others do the nitty-gritty to preserve a little deniability. But there's no question that he knew about it, and I think it's pretty obvious that he was interested in any scheme that would promote his goal of overturning the election. At one point, the acting director of the Department of Homeland Security had to tell him, we can't do that. I mean, it's not permissible. So certainly he was aware of the whole thing. We have testimony from Mr. Giuliani. And by the way, it's great to see Mark again. We worked so closely for so long in the committee. Going back to what we've got online, we were scrambling to get the report done. I think we did a good report, but I was insistent, along with all the other members, that everything get out there, all the transcripts. And I'm confident that the Department of Justice, as well as state prosecutors who are pursuing matters, have thoroughly reviewed what the committee provided. That's what we wanted to have out there. And I'm sure that is factoring into their own processes.
from your lips, Congresswoman. Let me take our viewers through the evidence. We've sort of gone back and recreated some of what the group references in their letter. Let me first play some of the testimony that the committee, and in some instances, Mark, you're doing some of this questioning. This is testimony, sworn testimony from Pat Cipollone and Eric Hirschman and others of this meeting.
I don't think any of these people were providing the president with good advice. And so I didn't understand how they had gotten in.
I was asking, like, you claim the Democrats were working with Hugo Chavez, Venezuelans, and whomever else.
I mean, at times there were people shouting at each other, hurling insults at each other. It wasn't just sort of people sitting around on the couch, like, chit-chatting.
Cipollone and Hirschman and whoever the other guy was showed nothing but contempt and disdain of the president.
I think that it got to the point where the screaming was completely out there. I mean, you got people walk in, it was late at night, it had been a long day, and what they were proposing, I thought was nuts.
It might be the only time I believe something Sidney Powell said. Here's Derek Lyons is the lawyer in the middle, not as familiar to people who watch the public hearings, but he speaks after Cipollone and Hirschman, and this is from his transcript. Later in the evening, when he was there in person, Rudy's point of view was that in some way, the campaign, I believe, was going to be able to secure access to voting machines in Georgia through means other than seizure, that, the access would be, I don't know what the right word is, but, voluntary, like it wouldn't be coerced, and that, examination of those machines would begin to show the evidence of the allegations that were being made. How does Rudy, Mark, ever think that? I mean, Raffensperger and his deputy, Gabe Sterling, have been in front of cameras speaking publicly and transparently about the Georgia results, thrice audited. There was never any fraud in Georgia. I mean, what is your sense of the significance of that testimony from Lyons?
So there's been a lot of testimony. We played a fair amount at the hearings, and you see it in the report about the sort of insane, unhinged nature of the fight. That was mostly over these executive orders and whether the president should sign an executive order to seize the machines, and also the issue of whether Sidney Powell should be appointed special counsel to lead that investigation. The part that Derek Lyons is talking about is that at the end of the meeting, towards the end of the meeting, after it had moved from the Oval Office up to the White House residence late on the night of the 18th, Rudy Giuliani came over. He was summoned and joined the meeting late and started talking about a plan to voluntarily access the machines. Mr. Giuliani was against the concept of seizing the machines, having the military seize the machines, but he assured the president that there was another plan that he had in the works, and that was to get the machines voluntarily. And as you see in that letter that you cited at the beginning of the segment, through this litigation in Georgia, some details about what actually happened in Georgia have come out. And there's videotape showing that Georgia election officials allowed Trump allies to access the machines, seize the hard drives, and those hard drives have been disseminated, and then they're out, as in one memo on the subject says, in the wild. And so that's the aspect of the scheme that Mr. Lyons was referring to. Ms. Powell and Mr. Giuliani spoke a little bit about it, but we're fairly confident that at that meeting, that topic was brought up in front of the then president.
So let me ask you to put your prosecutor hat back on, Mark. Is this conduct that you believe to be chargeable by Fani Willis? I mean, do you think she's just announced a few minutes ago she's going to be prepared to issue her indictments between July 11th and September 1st? I mean, are these the acts that you thought the committee had mustered plenty of evidence of wrongdoing for?
Well, I'll let Congressman Lofgren talk about sort of the basis for our referral and what the acts were that sort of led to that. But there's no question in my mind that the Fulton County District Attorney is onto this issue based on public reporting. This whole issue of accessing voting machines through the use of public officials. There's been public reporting about some of the people on that video that I alluded to have been brought before the grand jury. So whether that's sort of the basis of the concerns regarding the former president, I can't say. I do know that The accessing of the machines didn't happen until January 7th in Coffee County, which is where this video took place. And there's discussions and there's been some public reporting about how that information was to be used after January or in January.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I can't say how prominently it figures in DA Willis's assessment.
Congresswoman, let me share one more piece of reporting from our organization and just pick up this thread with you. NBC's confirmed the existence of text messages that reveal Trump allies discussed using this data we're talking about, data breach from Georgia voting machines, to potentially decertify the 2021 Senate runoff election results. The key quote comes in a message from Jim Penrose, a former NSA official who was working with Trump's team. Quote, "We only have until Saturday to decide if we're going to use this report to try to decertify the Senate runoff election, or if we hold it for a bigger movement later." I mean, it feels like smoking gun evidence that they were inside these machines figuring out how to sow distrust in the results with their fraudulent meddling. I mean, what in your view is the appropriate consequence from law enforcement?
Well, the district attorney will be taking a look at that, as will the Department of Justice. They're going to have an opportunity to learn things that the committee could not. If you read, and it's online, Rudy Giuliani's testimony, for most of the questions, he refused to answer. He claimed it was attorney-client privilege, and we now know that there is a fraud crime exception. He's going to have to answer those questions. But I think it's logical that the president was very aware of this and that Giuliani was in cahoots potentially with those who unlawfully seized the software from the machines. They knew that the election was not fraudulent. In fact, Giuliani explained they didn't have the evidence otherwise. So this is really just a corrupt scheme to overturn the election and potentially more than one election. And when you step back from it, we got so involved over the 2 years of the committee putting the pieces together, but it's just starkly outrageous what these individuals did. I mean, what a threat to our democracy, really.
Well, so the committee has referred 4 crimes to DOJ: conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to make a false statement, inciting, assisting, and aiding and comforting an insurrection. I mean, none of the people we're talking about, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, none of the lawyers involved have been charged, or it hasn't been reported any of them have received word that they're targets of a federal investigation. Trump doesn't stay in power if he only overturns Georgia. I mean, Georgia is nonsensical as a state standalone prosecution. Congresswoman, where's Merrick Garland?
Well, they don't report to members of Congress about where they are, and they shouldn't. That's not their job. If they have something to say, they say it when they file an indictment. So I don't know any more than anyone else where they are, but we can see the people who are coming into grand juries, both in the Department of Justice inquiry and also in the Georgia state inquiry. And I think looking at who's coming in, it looks like they are pursuing the same things that we suggested. But that's just speculation, given who is coming in to testify to the grand jury. I'll just say this: they need to be thorough. They shouldn't indict unless they believe they can convict. But the sooner they can make a decision, the better off we are. I think having this hanging over the public without a decision is not helpful. And so I'm hopeful that they will get to where they're ready to decide either to indict or not to. I mean, whatever the facts lead them to be. And so the country can move on.
Mark, you are from there, not Congress. You are from a federal prosecutor. In terms of the quality of the evidence that you passed on, that the committee passed on to DOJ, is it the same quality of evidence that you would have viewed as good enough to make a determination to indict?
Well, first, I echo what Ms. Lofgren said in terms of what these investigators both the federal and the Georgia Fulton County investigators have access to a lot more information and to more witnesses than we had access to for time reasons and otherwise. And so I have no doubt that the evidence that has been gathered by Jack Smith and Fonnie Willis is, while it may be on the same path as Ms. Lofgren says, of the things that the committee was looking at, that it's deeper and it's corroborated, and there are witnesses who can put a little more meat on the bones that the committee provided. In terms of whether it's sufficient to bring charges, I don't want to speculate based on not knowing exactly what they found and what charges they're looking at and who they're looking at. So I'd rather not speculate on that.
Congresswoman, someone who was very skeptical of the body of work that the committee did was the 8 p.m. anchor at Fox News, Tucker Carlson. He will not anchor that hour on Fox News ever again. Fox News has fired him. Your reaction?
Well, I think it's a blessing for the country and perhaps the world. We know that he lied knowingly to his audience. He distorted the facts constantly, and really to upend civil order and democratic society. That he did the false narrative on January 6th is really a stark example, but you can go back over the years, multiple lies that he told the country and his audience. So I think it's probably a good thing that he's not there, but we don't know why he was fired. I mean, Fox allowed him to continue to spew lies for years. So whether it was that or some other matter, it's just speculation at this point. But maybe there's an opening at Pravda, Russian TV, so he can get a job.
He's been offered a job, I understand. Would you like to know the chain of custody for the 40,000 hours of security footage that Kevin McCarthy transferred to Tucker Carlson, Congresswoman?
Well, I would. I mean, it's my understanding that the Fox did not get custody of the entire 40,000 hours. However, they did get custody of some of it. And of course, they used it to distort what happened. Mm-hmm. When you have an event like that, not every single moment is somebody punching out a cop. I mean, some of it's walking to punch out the next cop. Mm-hmm. So to use the interim to say, well, nothing happened here was obviously absurd and really an insult to the office. When people contact me by email, I just send them back the footage of the MAGA mob attacking the police on the Western Steps.
It's a blessing to the country and the world. It's maybe the best thing I've heard all day about Tucker Carlson's firing. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren and Mark Harris, thank you so much for helping us dig into this story. It's confusing, but you helped a whole lot. Thank you very much. When we come back, much more on that other breaking news out of Georgia that we're covering. Our first glimpse at a window into when charges against Donald Trump and his inner circle could be announced for their work in trying to overturn Donald Trump's election loss in Georgia. Later in the program, how Republicans, tired of voters voicing their support for abortion rights, are now trying to keep the abortion issue off the ballot completely because it hurts them. It's another sign of a party completely out of step with the American mainstream doubling down on its anti-democratic practices. Plus, on the eve of the E. Jean Carroll defamation rape trial, this moment for the disgraced, twice impeached and indicted ex-president is getting even more legally perilous. We'll preview what we can expect in court tomorrow. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.